One of the greatest things that mankind discovered was the scientific theory. It is the key for us to understand how the universe works. It's why you have a computer that functions. It's why we got the internet. It's why we have a lot of the commodities from the modern world. It's the scientific theory. Now, the way the scientific theory works is that someone comes with a hypothesis, and in order to see if their hypothesis is correct or not, they run an experiment. And finally, once they found the experiment, they come up with the result, the conclusion, and then other people have to be able to replicate it. Like, this is important, right? Like, if the experiment cannot be replicated, then you're not using the scientific theory, and therefore it is not science. And a lot of the bullshit that has come up lately from the academia, it is called social science as a way to deceive, as a way to trick, because these experiments cannot be replicated. And so, it is a system of understanding. Like we can get closer to the truth sometimes by, like, for instance, understanding how groups of people and masses of people may react in a certain situation, but it is definitely not scientific. Because again, the experiments cannot be replicated. But what's even worse is that how do we know that the person doing the experiment and the people that are replicating are actually honest actors? Like, how do we know that someone didn't fudge the data? How do we know that someone didn't allow his biases in order to conduct the experiment in a dishonest way? Well, the answer to that is peer review. Peer review means that other scientists, other people who understand what you're doing, are verifying to see if you were honest. So, in other words, imagine that a guy is playing Dota, and then other Dota experts that, maybe they're people in esports, maybe they're individuals who play a lot of Dota, will watch the recording to see if you cheated or not. That's what peer review is. And so the question happens, what if the people that are doing the peer review are corrupt? What if those Dota esport players, they notice that you're cheating, but they tell the public that you're not? They're pretending that they haven't seen the cheat. How will the public know? And the answer is, well, they won't. Unless someone from the inside talks about it, or unless the system is so fundamentally broken that research like this comes out, which is absolute nonsense. And I'm pretty sure that it won't take long, probably a decade or two, that people are going to look back at this and they will wonder, like, how did we as a society allow the mental asylum to take over some of our most prestigious institutions that are supposed to be the pillars of learning and understanding and our civilization greatest progress? Because at the end of the day, this is all we have. Like, the knowledge that we gain while we're alive, we're passing off to our descendants. And this is the type of knowledge that our generation has produced.
So this timeline provides an illustration of how racial awareness develops. According to research, 3-month-olds show a preference for looking at faces that are similar to the race they see most often. At 9 months, infants are unable to distinguish the facial features of racial groups other than their caregiver unless they frequently see images of racially diverse people. By the age of 2, children are putting people into categories based on race, and they are observing and internalizing power dynamics. At age 3, children develop biases and begin assigning meaning to race by attributing positive traits to the dominant race. However, children can still respond to positive messaging about their own and others' racial identities. By age 5, children of all races demonstrate social biases primarily by attributing negative traits to non-white races. At this age, children are capable of acting against racial injustice.
So I want to explain what's actually happening and then the conclusions, because, like, this study is incredibly insidious. In other words, like, it takes things that are true, it takes things that are rooted in reality, but it embellishes them in a way and drags certain conclusions that aren't obtained from the experiment. So basically what they did, because I actually read this paper, is that they took babies and they noticed that when presenting the baby with a scientist that's from a different race, the baby would experience distress, would start to cry, pretty much. And so, like, because the scientist was a different race, they concluded that, the baby is racist. He's going to drop the N-bomb. He's going to say the N-word. In reality, what's happening, and again, like, science already knows this. Like, this is something that we have experienced in mammals. We know that human beings act the same way. It's part of the evolutionary nature for humankind, and again, like, for mammals as well. And when talking about groups of people, yes, even babies, it's important to point out that there are outliers. Like, that doesn't mean that every single child is the same, but generally speaking, children get attached to their family, to the people that they see in their house every single day. And so, if you happen to be the caretaker of a child, you don't even need to be related by blood. Like, you can be, for instance, the nurse at a hospital dealing with babies in incubators. Just because, like, the baby gets used to your presence, and that includes the smell of the person, that includes the touch, the way that person feels, right? Like, usually babies don't get to see up until later in life, but once they are able to discern faces, the facial features, they get attached to their caretakers, which usually are the parents. And so when they see a stranger, like when they see something they haven't seen before, they start to cry. Now, this is an evolutionary trait in order to create alarm for the parents that something is happening. Like, something is going on, like in this case, well, a stranger is in the room. And it doesn't need to be like a different racial feature. It can be a person with glasses. It can be a person that has like a very long beard. A person that has a weird mustache. Like, any of these things are going to cause distress. Again, not all babies are the same, but like generally speaking, this is why when I go visit, like for instance, I went to visit my in-laws, and the moment that my mother-in-law picked up my son, like my son started crying. Why? Because he never seen her before. She had a weird hairstyle. She was probably smelling different, because smell is still important for babies and infants. They can't see very well, and so like they use their sense of smell. And if you have, like, for instance, my wife, when she used the perfume, and we went out, when we came back, she went to see my son, and he started crying. Why? Because the perfume was there. Like all these things are like we already studied these things. Like we know them for hundreds of years. This is not new science. But what they did is they took this knowledge and then they attributed malice to it. They attributed like their own personal views into it, as suggesting, so like the problem is that this is racism. Now, like they may have like some sort of point, I guess, because like if you do introduce the baby to like people of different races, then they're less likely to cry. But again, like the thing is that once the person develops, like once the person reaches of an age where he starts understanding the world, usually around the age of 5, you can actually communicate with your child, and you can tell them, it's like, the reason that Billy looks different is because he's of another race. And it's like, mommy, what is race? And then you start explaining. It's like, all of this was done with taxpayer money as a grift, right? Like these people that were doing the PowerPoint presentation, that were talking, like they were paid money. And apparently they were paid through US aid, right? So like, it was taken from the taxpayer, given to these people. And not only that, but like you soon realize that for them, racism means that it can only be done by white people. And so like it's a humiliation ritual, because white people would be the only ones that would be required in order to start showing pictures of other people to the babies, so that the babies don't start crying when they grow up. It's absolutely ridiculous. Like, they wouldn't ask black people to show pictures of white people to the baby. But by the way, can you imagine just how fucking racist that would be? Can you imagine just like how fucking racist it would be like if the government would require black people to show pictures of white individuals to their babies so that the kid doesn't cry when he sees my... Like, this is what we're talking about. Absolutely vile, waste of taxpayer money, complete grift, and the only reason that it could survive is because you weren't allowed to question it. You weren't allowed to challenge it. You weren't allowed to say anything negative about it. Like, you were there to sit, shut the fuck up, and obey. So apparently this is, why a lot of people are sad, because the gravy train is ending. And they're like, oh, well, what about the starving kids in Africa? Like what about the massively corporeal manifestations of people in America that were pushing this stuff with taxpayer money? Horrible. And not to mention, the whole thing with racism, like the problem that I understand with racism is that it requires intent. Because otherwise, if it doesn't require intent, you can't really judge people based on it, right? It would be like, they kind of did consider it like an original sin. Because they went even to the concept of unconscious bias. So, like, even if you're not a racist, even if you don't think racist thoughts, you still are unconsciously, but you don't know it, however they do. Fucking wild, man. Like, some of these theories that they were pushing. One of the worst was that people, white people, like, we are racist in such a manner that we have, like, this conspiracy theory with each other. I think, like, Robin DiAngelo talked about it in her book, White Fragility. Like, we're all conspiring with each other to be racist without even knowing. So, like, if there's, like, 3 white people in the room, we already start conspiring against the black person without actually having to talk or discuss it. Like, we might not even be aware that we're doing this. Fucking wild. Yeah, so as you can see, Elon Musk says funding for racist baby trading is canceled. Again, like, this would mean that you can assign guilt to a baby for being racist. Like, what are you going to do? Cancel him? And not to mention, like, if racism were this level of inherent, then it would be like part of humanity. You wouldn't be able to say that it's malice or anything like that if everyone is born with it. It's kind of like being born with 2 arms and blaming people like, why are you born with 2 arms? This is where they am, But this is where they went. And finally, it's going to be over. Do read the pinned comment, and I'll see you guys in the comment section. Take care.